Data in the game of football. It's always been there. It's just not always been easy to access. Instead of a couple scouting assistants, some interns, and QC coaches working all hours of the night to track, formulate, put all that information in the system, we now have a little service called Pro Football Focus. PFF has changed the way the game of football is watched, evaluated, and today we got to talk to one of the guys that really helped make that possible. Steve Palazzolo, formerly of Pro Football Focus, now with the 33rd team, joins Neil and I to talk about the origins of his love for data. Again, a 6'10 pitcher jumping into the game of football, all that he helped to make possible in his years with the team, why the data is good, why it matters, and how it has changed the landscape of scouting. All that and more today on Scouting the League. Hey everybody, and welcome to Scouting the League. We are in the off season. Scouts are probably on vacation. Perhaps they're going to be in a spot driving with their families to hopefully listen to this episode. When you get to a stopping spot, make sure you head over, like, subscribe, and share this podcast wherever you are listening. Give myself, give Neil, give Steve a follow wherever you are at. If you are on X, Neil is at Inside the League. I am at Right Step ADV. Today's guest, Steve Palazzolo, is at Steve Palazzolo _. You can make sure check that. Check the show notes for the spelling of Palazzolo. I'm not even going to try, but we'll get to that here in a little bit. Make sure you share this with a friend. Continue to grow the audience. Some really new fun stuff coming up for Scouting the League as well as we dive into more content, talk more football related stuff, and perhaps a few more episodes every week. We will get more into the scouting game instead of just our long format Wednesday episode. Perhaps hit stuff 5 days a week. Be on the lookout for that as we get closer to July. In the meantime, though, make sure you are checking this out. Listen to our archives, all our great shows, any of the content we have out. If you haven't already, sign up for Neil Stratton's Inside the League Friday Wrap. He is at Inside the League on X. That is going to be the best spot to find that link, or head over to his website, insidetheleague.com. If you need to check it out, my website, rsafootball.com, for all things football, all things consulting, all things that I do. While you're over there, if you are a scout or aspiring scout, make sure you check out the scouting community. You can also head to thescoutingcommunity.com. If you're a scout, get every piece of information you need from the scouting world that every team, every GM, every high-level executive gets, but is largely hidden from the scouts out on the road, from data, survey analysis, per diems, all the information about what the landscape of the scouting network looks like. Get it all with the scouting community. Mentors, financial planning, insurance considerations, mentors, all the really good stuff over at thescoutingcommunity.com. Get signed up for a yearly plan, just $90. Again, not looking to make a bunch of money, but you head over, get signed up, be a part of the scouting community that's really helping scouts do all we can. A really fun development piece that you should be checking your emails on as well. If you are an aspiring scout, spot's the same, thescoutingcommunity.com. Scroll down a little bit lower, find that aspiring scout spot. Again, networking, development, what you should be doing now to set yourself up for a future in scouting. Again, I promise you it's not watching more film. It's going to be about all the other things you can be doing to get yourself set, get yourself networked, get yourself ready for it. So aspiring scouts, head over, get signed up. We will do some monthly meetings. We'll get a call set up where I can talk to you one-on-one, find out exactly who you are and what we need to do to get you set up. All of that is at thescoutingcommunity.com. Into today's guest, Steve Palazzolo spent 13 years really helping develop and make Pro Football Focus what we know it is today. It has come a long way. It has developed. It has grown. Again, Steve now working with the 33rd team, who also changes the landscape of all things NFL. You always hear about them during hiring time, but Steve and his co-host Sam Monson host the Check the Mic show. Again, a great podcast that we want you to check out after this one, of course. But again, Steve, really good insight, really unique insight, has made PFF what it was today. And, we will get to that now with Steve. Well, Steve, welcome to Scouting the League.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, it's a quick turnaround. Again, going back, we met at the first time for the combine this year. Got to shake hands, and all 6'10" of you towering over me. Little short Midwest scout. But again, let's talk about your origin story. Again, getting into football. Not a ton of 6'10" football players, but again, your background a little bit different. Not quite football. You're a smart guy, smarter than Neil and I put together, without question. But let's get into football, get into how you got to where you are today and what you're doing now.
Yeah, I mean, I was a pitcher growing up, and that's what I did. I wanted to become a major league shortstop, and then outgrew that, so I pivoted to pitching.
Definitely not many 6'10" shortstops.
Once I hit 13, that was it. I was a good shortstop till I was 12, but outgrew the position. But yeah, I went undrafted out of UMass Lowell Division II school up in Massachusetts, and was lucky enough to play independent baseball and got signed by the Brewers, Giants, Mariners, bounced around a few different organizations for 8 years. And it's the interesting thing to me was I always loved football, of course, but there was a point in my career where pitching mechanics and everything that's happening today in baseball, where people are changing their pitch shape and their mechanics to throw hard and everything. I was in like the dark web of pitching mechanics, message boards and everything. Like, we were exchanging these ideas in the early 2000s that are now coming to the forefront right now. So I used myself as my own little science experiment to try to throw harder, because I'm 6'10", and I wasn't throwing as hard as I needed to be when I went undrafted. So I was very analytical, did that, got all the way up to AAA, and then there was a point in my career where I needed to not focus so much on the mechanics and just kind of leave baseball at the field, and I put all that energy into football. So I just started studying everything I could about football, X's and O's, and the whole thing. And then I was a huge fan of PFF in 2009. So they started a little bit before I got there. It was very, very early, but I just was a football nerd who found a website that graded players. I thought it was fantastic. Mm-hmm. And so, long story short, it was all free. They made it a $100 subscription. I was a poor minor league baseball player. I couldn't afford it. So the next year I said, "Hey, can I work for you?" They said, "Sure." I said, the email said, "Do you need help?" And they said, "Yeah, we always need help." And so they sent me a game to chart. Where's everybody line up on every play? I knew the NFL inside and out anyway, so I got like 99.5%. And they said, "All right, you're hired, part-time data collector," and the rest is history. So started at PFF right as I retired from my minor league baseball career.
Mm-hmm. Nice. And 13 years later, you walk away. You're with 33rd Team now. Before we talk about kind of the growth of PFF, what you saw, again, how it went from fringe NFL front offices, like the data's great, but let's leave it there, to where, man, you can't do anything without PFF data now. Again, it's how you look at film, it's how you find plays, all that kind of stuff. You're with the 33rd Team now. You've got your own podcast. Kind of talk about that real quick.
Yeah, I mean, PFF, the growth was amazing to see. I was the 6th full-time employee, and as I said, like I was attracted to it. I always tell this story. When I was just a fan of PFF, I remember looking at some of the game grades after a game. I think it was Gerard Mayo and Brandon Spikes, when they were both playing, 3-4 inside backers for the Patriots. And Brandon Spikes had like 3 tackles in the game, but he had a better grade than Mayo, who had 14 tackles or something. And I remember at the time thinking, they're onto something here. They're at least seeing the game differently. And that, when I eventually joined, and I got trained up in the grading process and helped enhance the grading process, added my own, tweaks to it, because we were always trying to make it better. You just saw, I always called it, they were trying to find the truth in every play, or we were at the time. And so sometimes, Brandon Spikes is just blowing up fullbacks in the hole, and he deserves credit for that. And Gerard Mayo's making tackles 6 yards down the field, and it shows up in the stat sheet differently. And so I love that. And I love that analysis of every player on every play from a production standpoint. It's funny, as a scouting podcast here, we used to say we're not scouts. And so we were not looking at plays through a scouting lens from a traits perspective, so to speak, but we called it essentially production-based scouting and
Hmm.
said, hey, we're going to just quantify good and bad football plays. And you can agree with them and disagree with them. And we could go on about that forever. But over time, I think PFF has done a really good job of taking 1,000 snaps of a player and getting you directionally into the ballpark of good, bad, or indifferent in various facets of play, whether it's run defense, pass rush, coverage. And then we have to figure out what to do with that at the executive level and everything. We could talk plenty about that, but it was fun to watch PFF grow. I'm still maybe the biggest advocate of PFF grading in the world. I always had to fight the fight on social media or in front office or two general managers. I'll tell this story. I mean, it was Rick Spielman when PFF started. We we had like 3 NFL clients. You know, a few caught on. They were like, "This data is great. We can't collect it. We need the data, right?" But we always had that angst about the grades, right? What are the grades?
Yeah.
Who are the graders? Are you in your underwear in your mom's basement grading my players? You know, what are you doing? How do you know what we're doing? How do you know the scheme? And we had probably 7 or 8 clients at the time. And Rick, we would at the combine, we'd meet with every team that would meet with us at the time. And Rick sat across the table from me and he's screaming at me. He's like, "How do you know this? And how do you know that? And who's doing these gradings?" And I'm yelling back at him like, "We know this, we know." Whatever. It was great. Rick's a friend now, so I could tell the story. But I always joke about Rick. "Hey, you were yelling at me the first time." He goes, "Yeah, I needed to know that it wasn't this idiot, teenage, kid
Yeah.
grading my players." And, so I was always an advocate for, look, it's just another data point in this whole evaluation process. So a lot of my early PFF career was not so much defending the grades, but just explaining how to think about it, the context around them. That's why we started our podcast, the PFF NFL podcast, in 2012. My podcast partner Sam and we started way back then, and that evolved eventually to what we are now, our Check the Mic podcast, where it's still him and I talking, football from not just an analytics standpoint, but just overall team building and what we're seeing. So I spent a lot of my time doing that, building products for PFF along the way, and earning the trust of NFL teams and clients. And yeah, NFL teams and college teams, they use the PFF data as this foundation database for their day-to-day, as you're talking about, game planning, scouting, efficiency, whatever it might be. But I also think there's a place for using the data analytically to figure out, to make better decisions, whether it is from a week-to-week game plan standpoint or in player personnel. So I think that's my 13 years in a nutshell.
Yeah, no. Again, one of the things that I remember back to 2016, 2017. I'm starting with the Falcons, and again, the data was always there. The efficiency of the data, you
Yeah.
hit on that word efficiency from a scouting standpoint, to be able to, again, I don't have to sit there in a dark room, and do cut ups after cut up after cut up to find it. It's like, man, I can click 3 buttons and PFF has all of it. But I remember, his name John Termina, who was just growing as an analytics guy in Atlanta with us. And I was like, man, PFF marked it this way, and I don't agree. And he's like, let me get him on the phone. Let me talk to who did. And again, as PFF was growing, again, as you said, making the product better, explaining, hey, this is why we categorized it this way. And again, that is, again, if you want to understand why PFF is what it is now, the absolute monster, the go-to, the reliable source, it's because, again, there's been that willingness to, okay, yeah, let's tweak it a little bit. Let's make this a little bit better. Well, let's split this. It's not just one thing; it is 2 things, and that has been fantastic. And again, credit to, again, you probably being a big part of that team, is the grades and the data. Again, everything has just grown exponentially over the years. And again, thinking about it, 13 years ago to what the number of data points in any play today, not even bringing in the player tracking. I mean, it's wild to think about how many of these different points that are out there for scouts and teams and executives to use.
Yeah, it's been fun watching it grow. And a big part of what I always tried to pursue was figuring out what to do with it, right? Because a lot of what fans see is just the grade gets thrown out there, and even from just a scouting perspective, you see there's a game grade and there's a season grade or whatever, and you might agree or disagree or whatever it is. But even we always said, well, there's context around this, right? If we say this tackle has this grade and this tackle has a different grade, does it mean this guy's better than him, or did he in this system perform better at the role that he was asked to do? The role matters. So I was always on this quest for, like anyone else, right? We're all trying to find the best players, the most valuable players, and build the best team. Well, there's context around all of those numbers that are needed, and so I think that's the crucial point. So I've always been on the search for that. How do you add all the proper context? Some context doesn't matter. Some people say, "Oh, look what he does in these situations." It's like, yeah, well, that's 5 plays. That's not going to correlate, right? So we're all
Yeah.
looking for the right way to evaluate. I've always been a believer. There's also certain positions. And I said this at PFF all the time. There's certain positions where I would trust the grades more than others, just because they're more consistent, they're more stable
Yep.
year to year, and you need to look at them. And I think after having 15 years plus of NFL PFF data and 10 years plus of college PFF data, that's a rich data source now to use. You have to use that in the draft somewhere. You have to put that with scouting grades, and roll that up to make better decisions. All that information is extremely valuable, should never be thrown out. There were times early on where if you only had 3 or 4 years of data, I know the famous 2016 Browns draft that was like analytics driven, there probably wasn't enough data to really go off of PFF grades at the time. And we learned a lot of that at the time. And but now it's a pretty rich data source. And I think there's really good insights, position by position, that where some of the information, should be used more than others.
You said the magic word there, Steve. I just happened to have done a little study of the 2016 draft for a book I just completed. Do you
I saw
think
it. I was helping you promote it. I'm just helping you promote the book.
I appreciate it? I'll take every ounce of promotion I can get. What could the Browns? Was it just that it was too early? Do you think, or when I was talking to scouts, I still hear it from them today in Cleveland. Was it that they didn't coordinate enough with the traditional scouting? Do you think it was just that they were too early and too sold on the hard numbers kind of stuff? Or what do you think the failing was there?
I use that as an example too, because I've seen you and other people mention it, and I think at the time it was mentioned. I don't know. I don't know exactly what they were using for data, so to speak, right? But I do know some of the misses there. Like when you look at Corey Coleman, every metric's going to love Corey Coleman, but that was a few years into the Baylor offense where they're lining up receivers out near the cheerleaders as wide as they possibly could.
Right.
And that skewed everything. And even with a PFF grading perspective, I remember watching Jarrett Stidham right around that time and other quarterbacks who came out of that system. And there are certain systems that allow for easier grading. And that, in addition to, well, they're running 3 routes and there's no reads, there's no NFL route tree, there's nothing there, right? So is that an analytics failure, or is that like we just didn't know enough about the Baylor offense at the time failure, or we didn't learn enough about what Kendall Wright and some of the others that came through first?
Mm-hmm.
So it's like early Art Briles offense, those were tough challenges that the Tennessee offense has given us now. Emmanuel Ogbah maybe was analytically driven, where he didn't have the juice off the edge or the full move set or the flexibility around the edge. Carl Nassib, I mean, he led the nation in sacks, but I don't think that was it. It wasn't analytics to say he has the most sacks, let's draft him. But that was a 3rd rounder. I think that was a fine 3rd round pick. Maybe Cody Kessler, right? He was interesting to me because there was elements of his data that was strong, but he had, no arm whatsoever. And so it's just an interesting class. And I don't think it was a total failure. You found, guy like Joe Schobert and his conversion to linebacker and everything. So it was interesting. So I don't think it was pure analytics, like this all failed. I think there were various reasons why some of those top picks may have failed.
Well, I know, speaking of the scouts, and I don't want to dominate this, but they felt like the philosophy with the Browns that year was, I think they had 16 picks in that draft. How can we fail this draft with that many picks? It was a pure, let's throw it all against the wall and see what we can find. But at the same time, you mentioned Cody Kessler. I was told that was their number 1 rated quarterback. And obviously they traded out of the top 2 picks in the draft.
That's
and
an analytics move, then, right? That's
what it seems like to me. But maybe I'm wrong. Steve, tell me if I'm wrong.
No, that's the one. And look, I always put, when it comes to analytics, I'll tell you this really quick. Kessler, that sounds like an analytics pick, right? Because you could easily stack the numbers and say, well, of course he's higher, he's more productive than Goff and Wentz and everybody else, right? I could see that as the case. I thought there was a point, and if you wanted part of my PFF lifespan, when I was doing our draft coverage and everything and mock drafts, and I believe I was the first one to put Baker Mayfield number 1 overall in 2018, and I always did my mock drafts, what I would do. I never tried to be predictive or whatever. So I was trying to make a point like, this is our guy. This is the analytics darling. It's Baker Mayfield. He's got the best profile we've ever seen. I was of the mind in my early PFF years that the data would be so strong at the quarterback position that we wouldn't have misses anymore. I was wrong about that. Now, I am a strong believer that if you follow the data for certain positions, I know it's a scouting show. I would almost overweigh the scouting in certain aspects. You know what I mean? I think there's certain positions I trust.
What are those positions, Steve?
I think pass rushers, you can get there. And I honestly think offensive line, you can get there pretty well.
Okay.
Trusting the data. I really do.
Okay.
I'm not saying blindly. And listen, I'm not an advocate for don't put eyes on a player. I want to put my own eyes on a player. There's times where the data disagrees with my own eyes and vice versa.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's certain positions where you would weigh it higher. Mm-hmm. And I thought there'd be a point where quarterback, we weigh it higher. Mm-hmm. And Baker Mayfield was the guy. And then, of course, we had not had a run where Josh Allen's hit, right? We had had a run where the toolsy quarterbacks did not work out. And so we were like, of course Josh Allen's not going to work out. The guy is, low, inaccurate, big-armed guy. So Josh Allen hits and Mahomes hits and Justin Herbert and all the toolsy guys start hitting, and Lamar's like his own case. And so the data for quarterbacks, but long story short, I thought the data for quarterbacks would be really trustworthy. It's not. And there's other reasons for it, right? The standards are higher. We're looking for a top 8 to 10 quarterback. Just getting a starter isn't good enough. You have poor Tua over here is a really good quarterback, and half the fan base wants to trade him, and the other half thinks he's great. So if we held every position to the same standard, you find a top 8 guy or bust. I bet the bust rate's the same if we're just looking for Micah Parsons, if we're just looking for Myles Garrett, and who's even Jalen Phillips is not good enough. You know what I mean? So I think that's part of it at quarterback, but that's just part of my story, right? And so I would never be that strong on the data at quarterback because of so many variables, including the high standard that we set before them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Steve, again, one of the things I talk with different agents about, and my simple mind from a scouting standpoint, and again, the way I think about kind of the way our analytics team did things and the way stuff is presented, is like the majority of the league, and this kind of goes to your quarterback point, the majority of the league is in your fat part of the bell curve. Again, if you stick everybody up on that bell curve, the majority of the players, again, you want to be in the fat part. Now you get your rare outliers that are, again, on the top end. Those are the players, you absolutely want. When analytics, when the scouting report, when the character, when the medical, when everything's up there, again, that's your no-brainer. That's your top 10. Like, there's going to be no disagreement on those players. But it's those middle players where it's like, man, it's got a lot of traits, a lot of elements of their profile is in the fat part that says they're going to be good. And then again, maybe it's an analytics piece that's maybe on the top end, or an analytics piece, or a traits piece, or a skill piece, or a leadership piece that really pulls them up. Those are the players where it's like, man, I really like it, but this is saying, hey, I should like him even more, or vice versa, where again, if you live in the fat part of that bell curve, and then it's like, this part is really low there. With quarterbacks, there's 32. You're grading 32. You're evaluating 32 on Sunday. So again, the bell curve gets pretty sparse. With other positions, is that part of it? That again, the numbers are just so limited. O-line, you're going to have 5+, probably 7. You're probably going to end up with 7 or 8 starters across the course of an NFL season, where there is a ton of data points, but again, just the positional numbers tell you that, hey, it's going to be a little bit harder to get that full repertoire of data to make the right decision.
Oh yeah, I mean the fact that there's 32 starters, like I've made the point. I've been a Jameis Winston fan, say, for the last few years. Like I think Jameis Winston has been a top 32 quarterback in the NFL for the last few years, but like that's not the goal, nobody. But so once if you were ranking quarterbacks in a linear fashion, once you have QB 20. You're trying to replace him, right? You're looking for the next guy. You're looking for the next. Let's take a shot at Anthony Richardson. Okay, he's done. Let's get to the next guy, and that's fine. Like that's the nature of the position, because we know that the impact of Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar, Allen, those guys, it's astronomical. And the Tua example, or the Derek Carr example, those, like Derek Carr is a fantastic second round pick for what he did for a decade in the NFL. But every single year, it's half the fan base thinks he's great, and half the fan base wants to get rid of him. That's a challenge, right? Mid-tier quarterback play is I think that's the fat part of the bell curve. There's plenty of those, not plenty, but there's enough of those guys to go around. But you're always chasing the top 8 to 10. Whereas, if you draft a tackle ninth and he becomes the 20th best tackle, it's like, all right, it's not what I wanted, but he's Mike McGlinchey. He's a good starter, and he's fine, right? And we play with that.
Yeah, that's the Jake, again, being an Atlanta guy, that's the Jake Matthews argument.
Yeah.
Again, he's never been the sexiest left tackle. Again, Taylor Lewan, Ronnie's, like, there's been a bunch of players that you put up the traits and you put up everything else. Like, yeah, I'm going to take that player, but it's like you look at the paper, it's like, wow, Jake has been the 6th best tackle for the last 15 years. It's like, yeah, everybody's going to take that player every day of the week. And again, you think that's the Will Campbell argument at 4 for New England. Again, are you going to get a big, sexy, no, you're going to get a starting left tackle, hopefully for the next 15 to 20 years. And you're not going to have to worry about drafting that position again. And that's where, again, the expectations, it's a conversation I've had with some people, like, expectations absolutely matter when it comes to draft, when it comes to signing these players, when it comes to some of these contracts that guys are signing. The expectations do matter for again, the 2 examples, a great one, some Brock Purdy. Again, Brock Purdy has overlived every expectation. Now he just signed a big money contract, so expectations are now different. Does it really change it all of a sudden real quick to where it's like, oh, we got to bring it all back in here and get the fan base back on board and the expectations within what they're asked to do? Man, it's a fun one. Again, tackles, O-line, pass rushers. You mentioned pass rushers being a pretty accurate one. Again, you get guys like Abdul Carter, who, again, he probably checks every box. Another first rounder that, Cincinnati's had a hard time getting under contract, Shamar Stewart. Analytically, a guy that, again, checks a bunch of boxes, production's not one of them. Is he going to be one of those ones where, again, you're going to check him against an analytics, again, in 2 or 3 years to be like, all right, where do we need to tweak? Where, again, he checks a bunch of boxes, but not this really big one, which is production and finish.
Yeah, I think with edge rushers, you just want them to, you keep saying tick all the boxes. That's what I would encourage. When I talk to executives or general managers, that's what I encourage, is you obviously want to be able to tick every box. You want to tick the scouting and traits box. You want to tick the production box. But production, I would say more so at edge than, say, corner, right? Because corner production, because I know how it's charted. I know how inconsistent it can be, unstable it can be year to year. So I care less about production for, say, coverage players than I do the pass rushers, because I know how it's charted. It's every single snap, every single interaction. And that's a lot. That's a rich data set. And so, some of the case studies for me over the last few years, Shamar Stewart's going to be one of them. Trayvon Walker was obviously a clear one, with the best workout of all time, probably for an edge, and going number 1 with no production, and Tyree Wilson. And because they all had a counterpart in that draft, Tyree Wilson and Will Anderson, and of course Trayvon Walker and Aiden Hutchinson. And so I don't know where you guys stand on Trayvon Walker. I think he's been an okay NFL player, getting better. I think the sack totals are not indicative of the impact that he makes as a pass rusher, and I think he's pretty good against the run, getting better. I think he was overrated against the run his first couple of years, got better last year. That's just where I'm at with Walker. I don't think that's what you want to get with the number 1 overall pick. I think Aiden Hutchinson's been way better. And so I love how you mentioned outliers before. I think the outliers conversation is a fascinating one, because it's like, what perspective are you coming from? Because if you put Trayvon Walker's workout next to Myles Garrett and everyone else, it's like, well, he's the best. But you put his production next to everyone, it's a complete outlier. Whereas Aiden Hutchinson's workout was like a tick worse, but the production's, he ticked both boxes, right? It was a good enough workout. It certainly wasn't Trayvon, but like, how do you weigh those things? So I think Aiden Hutchinson's just been a better player. Will Anderson versus Tyree Wilson. Again, I'm not trying to offend anyone. I thought that was clear as day. Will Anderson, better player, projected to be a better player, ticked the production and workout boxes fine. Tyree Wilson didn't work out, but we assumed he was going to be a great athlete. But he was also 23, and his production he had 1 year of production, right? Whereas Will Anderson was dominating the SEC at a young age. That's where I think the whole puzzle needs to be put. And so Shamar Stewart, to me, is like a combination between Tyree Wilson and Trayvon Walker, where you have this freak athlete to a point, doesn't have the change of direction drills, though, that Walker had to kind of tick that box, and that shows up on film. He's not turning the corner all that efficiently. But then you see his best plays, and that dude is like, cinder block hands, blowing up run plays and everything. Like, he has the tools to be disruptive, but he never did it, right? And you put that up against someone else that did it at a high level. Maybe a Laiatu Latu last year is an interesting comp where it's not an elite athlete, but just a technician. And so we'll see how those guys develop. But I think it's a really good case study. Shamar Stewart. I hope he gets, signed so we get some reps, so we just get that test case here, because I think analytically, I would say Shamar Stewart, Tyree Wilson, and Trayvon Walker were the three that did not pass the production test the most out of the last few years. And I think Walker is getting better, but I don't think he's justified number one overall yet. I think Tyree Wilson has a way to go, and Shamar Stewart, we'll see. So those are interesting case studies in the how do you incorporate analytics with scouting and put it all together, I think, when you're evaluating players.
Yeah. No, I think I have for all the Bengals fans out there, I've got full confidence that Duke and crew are going to get both Trey Hendrickson and Shamar Stewart signed. I think it's going to be a fantastic combination there. So again, Cincinnati, relax a little bit longer. The Bengals, you'll be fine. You got the quarterback, you got the wide receiver.
I'm in Cincinnati, but I agree. I'm in Cincinnati. I don't want to hear any more about it. So yeah, I think Duke's going to take care of business there as well.
Good. Go ahead, Neil.
The hottest thing going right now, Steve, and I don't need to tell you this, is the portal. And when you talk to scouts now, all you hear is the players aren't getting developed anymore because the moment they hit any kind of turbulence, they just change teams. How much can analytics remedy that, answer that question for you? I guess if Cam Ward never leaves San Antonio, would you be able to look at him after 4 years of development, 5 years of development, whatever? He didn't go to Wazoo, he didn't go to Miami, and still see a guy that, wow, this guy could be a starter and be – obviously, if he never left San Antonio, he probably isn't ever the number one pick. But could you see in him the upside to say, man, this guy could be a real player here?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I've seen the studies out there too about, it's harder to get drafted when you get transfer, and transfer and this and that. I think there's a little survivor bias in that, but I think it's worked in favor of quarterbacks in recent years. I mean, Cam Ward, you saw him elevate Washington State and then go to Miami and elevate that squad. And when I go back to this QB, data and this and that, I mean, I might go straight caveman on evaluating quarterbacks and go back to like, are you elevating the team or not? Not necessarily wins or losses, but are you elevating the squad, right? It might be as simple as that. Or are you the best player on the field like Jaden Daniels was at LSU? Right. It might be the simplest thing. Cam Ward, we got to see him elevate two different programs. I think Bo Nix, man, I mean, I think I keep describing him as going from playing like Jay Cutler to playing like Alex Smith. So you got to see him in two systems, live two different careers, go from this gunslinger, playing outside the pocket, crazy man, and then you got to see him at Oregon in the pocket, ran when he needed to, took care of the ball, quick release, high completion percentage, completely different people. So I think for Michael Penix Jr., you got to see him take Washington to the national championship. So I think QB-wise, from an NFL draft perspective, it has probably given some quarterbacks some great opportunities to show what they can do. At the other end of it, I mean, there's definitely players that are transferring because, you see that guy that like starts at Michigan and then just starts going lower and lower and lower. And that's telling, right? It's like you're not producing at these levels and you're just trying to be big fish in a small pond. That's probably not going to work out all that well. But for other players, you get to see them in multiple systems. And I think going back to box ticking, I think that's what it is, right? If you produce at a low level and then you produce at a high level, you're, Braden Fisk, and you've got that opportunity to go play at Florida State and compete next to Jared Verse and hold your own, like that worked for him. And so I think it'll come down to the player. And if they show that they can do it, I think that helps. I think that helps in the evaluation that you got to see him do it across a couple places. And if he didn't, maybe you didn't have to ask that question. What happens when we draft this small school guy and we put him in the NFL? Just like Senior Bowl week. How's he going to compete Senior Bowl week? Well, maybe you got a whole year of that. And like the Harvard kid last year that went to Louisville, like maybe we just we got the answer a year earlier and you didn't have to deal with it at the NFL level, I guess.
Yeah.
So Steve, the theme of May and June 2025 around the NFL has been, oh, you're a senior scout. You've been running the roads for 20 years. Or you know all these people, these schools. We don't need you anymore. we're going to bring in this guy, we're going to elevate this scouting assistant who's got a Harvard degree, and we're going to send him out. And the argument from scouts and fuddy-duddies like me is character is still important. And asking questions and knowing the academic guy and talking to the equipment guy and all those kind of things, that's still important. And what we're hearing from scouts is a lot of those guys are going out on the road, maybe with more of a numbers kind of background, not as much of, they don't have the soft skills, let's just say. They don't have the relationships just because they're young. And maybe they don't ever develop them. Steve, is character overrated in the evaluation process?
No, the character's huge, man. I mean, it's absolutely huge. Now, when we say it's a data point, right? When we say data, like I believe in on-field football data, and I would maybe value it more than you would, Neil. I don't know. I would probably value it more, but that's fine. It's all part of the equation. Nothing's 100%. I would value all the information, all of the character information and everything. There's when we were talking to NFL teams at PFF, there was a lot of times where they said teams would suggest we want to hide PFF grades from our scouts. So we want to have like a different login where the scout goes in and he can use all the fun tools, but don't show the grades. As the biggest grade of advocate in the world, I was like, no, you guys have to use them. And then I came around to like, okay, you're talking for scouts. That's the right way to go. I would hide the grades too. And I advise our general managers. I say, look, you're right. I want them to do their work away from any biases, right? You lose all the biases. And then I know for the scouts listening to this, on the other hand, if for professional development, you better know PFF grades, how to use them, and every other data tool that's out there. So I always give both answers. If I'm a general manager, I want my scouts doing their job. Go get the character information. Go do what you've been trained to do. Do it great. This isn't Moneyball, the movie, where it's like we're going to sit on opposite sides of the table and yell at each other. When there's disagreements, fine. But when an organization has 7 picks, and hopefully you have 10 to 12 in a given year, hopefully you can come to a consensus as best you can on 10 to 12. And if you do that from every angle, I think you're gonna win over time. It's not this guy versus that guy. It's like we've got to come to a consensus for 10 to 12 players every single draft cycle, and we're going to do well, free agency and everything. And so I don't know that I would need to know more about how that exactly is playing out. I don't know that I would throw numbers guys on the road to go do the scouting thing. I want scouts to scout. And then eventually I think it's the job of the general manager I always call them the information synthesizer, right? They're synthesizing all the information up to a decision point, and there's a lot of decisions along the way, and character is huge. And I want to say this the right way. Like, I think scouting evaluations matter too, but even then I would want that to be a data point in this whole thing, right? Just because you've been scouting for 30 years, are you actually better at finding the best safeties? Are you actually better at finding the best quarterbacks? Maybe you are, but maybe not every position, right? So I would use your actual evaluations where your strengths are. Maybe you're great at receivers. So that's a data point. That's all data that needs to be rolled up. And to be honest, the more experience you have, the more consistent data that I have too. If you have 30 years of experience, I've got a 30-year line of experience that I could test against. And I might say, look, you don't have a great history at tackles. I'm not going to weigh that as much. But that shouldn't be offensive, because we all know nobody hits 100%, right? We have to know what the base rate is. The base rate's, for finding above average players, it's like 15%. So we start with that and say, look, if you're at 20% at a position group, fantastic. Like, we'll use that. If you're at 4%, maybe we throw that out, right? So it's all data, and the more data you have, the better we can synthesize and make a decision.
Mm-hmm. See, you are advocating for data points. Again, I'm with you. The more data points you can have, character, the more elements of character, personal character, football character, how you treat academics, all these things, the more data you have, the better decisions you're going to make. Now, there are some teams that are maybe going away from that. Again, the Rams won Neil's Inside the League Best Draft Award last year, and now we're seeing the Jaguars go to a Rams model where it appears, again, we're not going to send guys to all-star games. We're going to actively seek out less data points, less touch points on these players. and as new GM James Gladstone say, hey, we want to guard ourselves against paralysis by analysis. As a data guy, as somebody that lives in that world, how do you battle against that? Hey, I want to have every piece of data, but I'm not going to allow myself to be paralyzed by just, again, getting lost in it.
So it's a good question. My understanding of the RAM system, and I think what James is implementing there, is not. It might end up being fewer data points, but I also think it's a different way of collecting the data. That'll be my understanding of it. I'll kind of leave it at that for a minute. So I don't know that it's less. Now, are you getting fewer interactions with players? Maybe. When I was reading between the lines, I think they're trying to get their interactions in different ways, where it might not be at the All-Star games, but they're still getting it. I mean, I don't think there's any team out there that doesn't believe in at least collecting character information and everything. But here's the other part. Not every data point matters the same, right? Just like I mentioned, the example of a scout, your safety evaluations might not be weighed the same as your tackles. There might be elements of you still have to, I would back test the character information, right? Because if a whole bunch of people that you evaluate as bad character players end up being good character people, then that's bad data, Right. So maybe you don't need that data anymore. So you still have to evaluate the data sources. That was just an example. You evaluate those sources, and I would throw away the ones that aren't as consistent or stable year to year and focus on the better ones. So that's how I would view it. So, but to do that, you have to have a big swath of data to test, and then you hone in on what you want to focus on. So that's my understanding of how that system may work. I don't think it's legitimately throwing out data points. I think it's doing it just in a slightly different way.
Yeah, it's going to be fascinating because, again, you can't look at the Rams draft with Verse and Fiske, and that, again, they killed that draft with their system. And again, now we're going to get another example of the way James did it. And again, I don't think anybody's arguing with Travis Hunter where they took him and being aggressive to go get him. And again, it becomes just like a lot of the other conversations, a little bit old school versus new school, the way we're kind of doing things now, and we're switching. We're going to, again, you see a bunch of these very good, successful GMs with non-road scouting backgrounds. Again, as you said, information synthesizers, again, gathering all that information, and if you want to call them business or analytics or Ivy League, again, whatever moniker you want to throw on them, a bunch of them have had a bunch of success, which is causing the whole landscape of scouting to change for, simple-minded football guys like me that, again, get lost in the data myself. Again, it's like, well, you kind of see a limit on the future a little bit. Again, good football people, you do the right things, it's always going to come through. And, it's going to be, again, the Jaguars will be a good test to see, again, beyond Travis Hunter, beyond this year, even a couple years. And again, you got to give a draft more than 1 year to see where it shakes out. Again, those guys stood out in LA. We'll see where it works out as we go forward. With that in mind, the analytics, the data, again, it's not going anywhere and it's not getting any smaller. We're also now bringing in player tracking. And again, I think everybody on the player tracking, and half of them, we use PFF data and we add in whatever player tracking. Again, you can't get away from PFF even if you wanted to. Where do you see it going? Like, what is going to be the really new frontier, the really new element of it that, again, whether from a coaching standpoint, from a fan standpoint, from a scouting standpoint, where it's like, man, this is going to be really fun. It's really going to continue to change it. And I'm really excited about it.
I hate to sound like the doomsday prophecy guy. It's AI with the big data. It really is. I mean, I'm already doing it a little bit with our consultancy. I'm helping with teams with portal evaluations and everything, and in the NFL draft. And everybody's running some level of models and everything, but you're just going to be able to accelerate that, adding financials to it. It's AI. So the player tracking is just giving you this rich data set. And so going back to as a PFF grade advocate, there are new metrics that you could pull off of player tracking, but it is about how you weigh them, right? So player tracking it's going to give us some game speeds, and okay, that's definitely going to help when a player doesn't run a 40 or whatever. But just like a 40, we have to put it in its proper bucket, right? We can't weigh it. A guy ran 4.3, therefore, it moves up 2 rounds. So you have to weigh the things properly. I think player tracking's added a ton of new metrics. I know a lot of the analytics people around the league, and they create rushing yards over expectation and better versions of this and that. And it's like, well, if it's not, if it's marginally better than what you already have with PFF, that's fine, but it's not really changing the game. But you're always just going to take other data points and make them a little bit better.
Yeah.
I think the AI aspect of it's interesting, though, because we're talking about big data and how quickly can you get information from that big data. I'm interested to see if that helps play calling. You know, we think about the years of a Shanahan system of making everything look the same and running play action off of it. Can we pull out play sequencing? And, you know, what is the ideal play sequencing that would take a human years to try to figure out the ideal play call? This sounds terrible, by the way. I hate this, right? And I don't think it's an actual answer, right? Play calling is, you would say scouting's more art than science. Play calling is as much art as science, right? We know that.
Right.
But I wonder how much the thing between an art and science is like, if you add a little bit of science to it, it might give you that edge. And I'm curious to know if AI gives you some level of play sequencing that works when you have enough data historically, right? If a linebacker sees this, and this, then the fourth thing is going to open up. I don't know. I think that's what's going to be tested here over these next few years, though. Player tracking will get a little bit more efficient, a little bit better, more accurate. Keep an eye on 33rd team on that aspect of things. So there'll be some good stuff there. And then what do teams do with it? It'll be interesting to see what they do with big data sets.
Yeah.
Steve, it was interesting to hear you say earlier that when I asked you what positions are best to evaluate with numbers, you listed offensive line. Whenever we have an analytics guy in here, I want to know how an offensive line, which is as close to 5 guys playing as a unit as any on the field, how do you individually really assess them? And why is it that you say that is maybe a more analytics driven measure now than any other on the field? I'm interested to hear more about that.
Yeah. So again, coming from the PFF grading system, I know what goes into it. So we could start with that. We had like a 300-page rubric on what to look for at each position. So it's like, all right, if you're watching the strong side tackle on power, here's what a plus 0.5 down block looks like when he's double teaming with the guard. Here's what it looks like when he climbs to the linebacker. Here's what a -1 looks like, right? So you have this rubric, and again, agree or disagree, but there's standards for what a good, bad, or indifferent block look like, right? Or a 0 or expected block. And so, and because a lot of early PFF was like targeted data was all you got from receivers and corners, you had fewer interactions on the perimeter than you did in the trenches. So when we were evaluating offensive and defensive linemen, we're watching all their one-on-one interactions. So offensive line, there's a lot of moving parts in there, right? The way I describe it is, do I know the play call? No. But once the play is snapped, I have a pretty good idea of what a guy's trying to do, right? When you're running power, when you're running duo, and you're double teaming the 3 technique, I have a pretty good idea of what the goal is. I have a pretty good idea of how plays are supposed to work. And if when someone screws up an assignment, sometimes you can't tell the difference between two. And we had a built-in measure where you just say, okay, that's a 0. That's a neutral grade. We're not going to guess and dock somebody. Most of the time, you can tell who screwed up. Most of the time, when guys one-on-one in pass protection, you can tell he's supposed to block the edge. Every now and again, you know, they're blocking the wrong guy and it's off. But again, you can usually figure out what the assignment is, we'll say, because that was the goal, right? Like, you know, it wasn't because it wasn't traits based. It was like, we need to find we have to make our best educated guess at what everybody's trying to do on this play. And if it's one guy doing something different, you could figure it out. If it's 2 or 3, okay, maybe it's not, but you could throw that play out, but you still have thousands of plays you're looking at. So when you go back and you look at thousands of plays of offensive linemen, and in a given year, say in the run game, a player might have 50 negatives, 50 positives, and a whole bunch of neutrals. That's a pretty good data set. Like, I could go through the positives, fly through them using PFF Ultimate, and have a really good idea of where the positives come from. And somewhere along the way, Neil, you might say, oh, these 5 weren't good blocks. It's like, all right, fine. Then we missed 5, whatever, you know, that's fine. but I have a pretty good idea of what's good. I have a pretty good idea of what's bad. And I bet over time, we're going to agree on, was this good or bad 85, 90% of the time. So you have, in the trenches, using PFF, you have a higher percentage of good and bad evaluations than you do other positions. Now, there's a ton of other factors, right? And once you get to college, you have RPO systems, you have RPOs breaking everything that we do, right? Because their whole thing is to make the linebacker wrong. Everything, you have tackles blocking defensive ends who are like, where's the ball? What's going on, right? So I get it, right? There's adjustments that need to be made for everything. But if I'm weighing my confidence, I have more confidence in the trenches just because there still are more data points there when it comes to offensive and defensive line. And what you're trying to get the individual's contribution to production. And when you looked at the game from a PFF lens, it was interesting because it didn't always match, right? I think over time, good run blocking leads to a good run game. Over time, right? There's always plays where the running back does all the work, right? There's some plays, and this is where I think PFF got it right and other people miss it. Because PFF is trying to evaluate the offense and the defense, sometimes it's just the defense screwed up. Sometimes the corner just loses contain. The blocking is not even good. The running back just runs outside and picks up 50. It's not even a great run. It's just bad cornerback run defense, right? That's it. And so I think PFF does a good job of quantifying all those where you might just be looking at the lineman or you might just be looking at the running back or whatever, whereas PFF's looking at the whole thing. And so there are plays where there's like 5 good blocks, but one bad one blows up the play for -2. Or there's a bunch of bad blocks, but it doesn't matter because it's backside and the corner, the running back stayed front side and that was open. And so I think over time that stuff, you got more information on offensive linemen. And again, we're talking, there's a lot of one-on-one interactions when it comes to pass blocking in particular. And you just kind of weigh those over time. And the PFF system gave you the ability to put levels on it, not just wins and losses, but this was an awful loss or a great win or whatever it may have been. And so I think you just had a richer data set that I don't trust anything blindly. I'm just saying I'd put the confidence a little bit higher on when it comes to trench play.
Yeah.
In certain systems, most systems.
Yeah. Again, it goes back in from the scouting perspective. You can watch 2 games, 120 snaps, and you're going to see a lot of you're going to be able to identify a lot of traits on any one of those 5 guys. You might have to watch 5, 6, 7 games of a corner or a safety to get the same number of relevant snaps. Because again, it's like, drop back, you had to angle back, pedal deep half, and the play's over. It's like, yep, nothing on that one. Like, you got to burn a lot of film for some of these other positions, which again goes back to the data set you have for that O line. And again, interior D line probably going to fall under kind of the same category, same bucket. Edges, again, to your point as well. And again, the RPOs change everything. They blow everything up.
It's the worst.
Good luck. Again, it's the worst. The screen game again it's like, oh man, look at him getting out. Oh nope, that was a screen. He was supposed to let him go. Yeah, it's the fun of watching film. And again, it always goes back to the check, and that is what I love. The teams that I talk to, the scouts that I talk to, using them hand in glove. Again, the analytics, the data, the objective is going to drive me to watch the subjective, and vice versa. Again, the subjective, all right, let's see if it matches up. When it marries itself together, when it fits perfectly, that's what you want. You're checking the boxes along the way. Again, PFF, I don't think they're rooting for any one of the 32 teams. They want good football. They want good players playing in the NFL. They want good quality data. Again, scouts on the road, they want to be right. They want players to be good. Again, most scouts want every player to succeed. And again, so getting them right, getting them in the right system, getting the right grade, drafting them in the right spot, putting them in the right spot to win. That's what it's all about. And again, hopefully what everything, scouting, data, analytics, player met, again, all of it is for good football.
Yeah. The one other thing I wanted to add too, which was interesting, is like we would talk to offensive line coaches a lot and they would say, oh, you gave this a negative, but I put him in a tough situation, right? I'm asking him to make the backside cutoff on his own. And so PFF actually doesn't have bias. I found more bias with the offensive line coaches I talk to than with PFF, because by the way, my examples are always like dated by 10 years, but I would always say, Joe Thomas, we're not saying this is Joe Thomas making the block. If he missed the block, he missed it. If he makes it, he makes it. We're not saying this is Joe Thomas. We're not saying this is, the number 4 offensive tackle. If he misses the block, he misses the block. We're like, that's just number 73. So there's no bias there. Whereas an offensive line coach is like, hey, he's he's third string. He only had 1 day of practice this week. We can't ask him to do this. And so we don't have that bias there. I almost see more bias sometimes. I'm not blaming anybody. I'm just saying you see more bias sometimes when people have stuff at stake, right? They want their offensive linemen to look good. They know that this guy's not as good at what they're asking, whatever it might be, whereas PFF is coming with completely objective eyes. But that's also where you have to go back and say, well, this guy had a bad grade. Well, yeah, like when, the inside backer for the Steelers had to play, he had to fill in on the edge for a couple games. Lawrence Timmons. He's a linebacker. He was an edge in college. He's an inside backer. They have to put him at edge rusher for a couple games or whatever. It's like, well, you can't rush the passer for 30 times at the NFL level. Of course his grade's going to take a hit. Or Joe Tooney, more recent example. Joe Tooney's got to go play left tackle. Did he hold his own for a guard? Absolutely. Got beat 4 or 5 times a game still, which isn't good for a tackle, right? So it's all relative. It's good for Joe Tooney, guard conversion, very impressive. It's not good for the standard left tackle, right? So you can't go back and trash Joe Tooney because his PFF grade was bad. There's context around everything.
Yeah. Context around everything. I think that's what it goes back to is, again, there's context around everything. And again, when that old line coach says, yeah, we shouldn't have asked him to do it. Well, you did. You asked him to do it, and it cost you running back, minus 2 yard run and, all that kind of stuff. So, Steve, we've spent most of our time talking PFF. Again, you're not even with PFF. Again, you're a champion for it. It's awesome. 3013, obviously the Check the Mike podcast. What are you covering? Like, what are football people going to get out of that Check the Mike podcast? What do you guys have going on right now?
Yeah, my podcast partner, Sam Monson, and I, we go game by game during the season. So every Monday morning, we'll be there 7 a.m. Eastern, review every single game, kind of high level, what happened, what did we see, big storylines, preview every game on Thursdays. And then Wednesday, we have 3 shows per week. We'll kind of hit any of the big stories around the NFL. But it's always, I'm always amazed when I'm making the rounds at the Senior Bowl or the Combine or whatever, the number of executives that listen or front office people or scouts that listen. A lot of times we can help fill you in on stuff that's going on around the league when you're just focused on your team, things you're missing, whatever it may be. So we try to cover every team as much as possible. We make fun of the shouty shows, the Stephen A. Smith type of shows. We always joke about that. We're not
take language, Steve.
Yeah. So we try to give the same type of nuanced conversation that we'll have here, or one that that they're going to have in a draft room. Are we going to draft this guy or that guy? What are the pros? What are the cons? What are we considering? We had great discussions about Shamar Stewart this year, right? He had this workout. He had this production. How do we weigh this? Do I want to take the risk? Do I want to let someone else? Whatever it may be. So we try to have those fun team building, in-depth type of discussions on our Check the Mike show.
Okay. Well, that's exciting. It's going to be one of the hardest elements for every road scout is, it's hard enough to keep up with your own team. Hopefully you're in a spot where you can watch them on Sunday, much less keep up with the other 31 teams on the league. Again, that's a perfect show. Get the run around, get the league view of it from you and Sam. And you teased a little bit of, what the 33rd team could be working with, some player tracking. Any more you want to get it, or are you just going to drive people to the website to go check it out and keep the radar on?
It's all at the team side. I'll just say, if you're working for a team right now, talk to the relevant people within the building and get in touch with 33rd team if you haven't already. So we'll just keep it at that. I think that's all I can say at this point.
Good. Well, the 33rd team does awesome work. Again, we've been hearing about them. Really, again, it's always the hiring cycle that I think they always come up as much as anybody. Again, helping with GMs, helping with hires. Again, plenty more that you guys do, you and Sam do. And again, excited to kind of see where it goes, where it continues to grow. And again, perhaps you need to, make a call into the building. Yes, everybody's on vacation now, but again, hopefully somebody picks up their cell phone. Again, they don't have anything else going on other than maybe kicking it up on the beach. So they'll have a conversation about what your team is doing with the 33rd team. But we really appreciate it. And Steve, again, it's not going anywhere. It's fun. as dumb as I am, I love to nerd out with data and analytics. And again, I'll just go watch football now and, help myself out. But again, really appreciate you being on. Where can people, again, other than the 33rd team, do you have a Twitter, a website, Instagram? Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, Twitter, Steve Palazzolo _ had to change that a couple of years ago. That's the main thing. Check the mic, and then check the mic wherever it's our own feed on YouTube. Check the mic, or wherever you listen to podcasts, just search Check the Mic, MIC. You'll see my silhouette of crazy hair, and be sure to listen and subscribe.
Yeah. Well, crazy hair, you have hair. So, well done on that, Sandy. Go check the Mic podcast after you listen to us, of course, and you can follow Steve, check out 33rd team. Steve, appreciate it. Good luck with everything. We'll definitely, we'll talk again.
All right. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Agents, before we go, make sure you go check out Agent Live 360. It is at agentlive360.com for everything you need for your agency, from players to coaches, managing profiles, tracking invoices, sending invoices, getting paid, keeping up on every element of your entire agency. Notification emails, file folder storage, ROI, transactions, invoices, calendar, contracts, teams, reps, everything all in one spot for you. That is Agent Live 360. Hop on, request a demo. Yours truly will hop on, walk you through it. I can promise you we will talk some football as well. Sign up now with code TRIAL90 for a 90-day, 3-month trial at just $10 a month for Agent Live 360. That's at agentlive360.com. Go check it out now.